of our ancestors was that they came from northern South America. Okay. So that stretched everywhere from Colombia to Venezuela. But the thing about these modern times is that with genetics, you can trace back anything and anywhere. It's not guesswork. See, before, everything that they knew was due to archaeology. And archaeology, it's a great science, but it's mostly guesswork, you know? An archaeologist will find an object and they'll say like, oh, this object was probably ceremonial or whatever. But it could have been that somebody 1,000 years ago was just playing around with a stick and threw it in the ground, and then somebody finds it 1,000 years like, oh, this had a special meaning, blah, blah, blah. But genetics is very precise. So what they did was that they grabbed bones from Cuba, Dominican Republic, and Borica in Puerto Rico, and they compared these ancient bones to modern day people in the Caribbean and also to modern day peoples in South America. And what they found was the exact routes as to how we got there. So one area that was always iffy was the Guyana area. So now today we know that different people came through there. So like when you look at Borica in Puerto Rico, you find that there was a migration that came through the south, heading west, and there was a migration that came through the north part of the island, also heading west, you know? And so before it was just like these straight lines, you know? And so we know today that it was like that. But what we do know is that there was two basic migrations. One that occurred about 6,000 years ago, and these are called the Archaics. And they came to the islands and they went from Cuba to the Dominican Republic, possibly to Puerto Rico. And then about 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, another wave of Arawakan speaking people again began migrating, and this time they made it all the way up into the Bahamas as well, and down into Jamaica. And that's what gave rise to the modern Taino people. But one thing that's amazing is that the old people that got there mixed very little, which is very odd. They mixed very little with the newcomers, you know? Because I guess even though they were also Arawak, they were different after so many thousands of years of being separated that they were not the same kind of people, I guess, but they haven't found it too much intermarriage. And that's something that's very rare. What they did find was that genetic cousins exist. Like they found bones in the Bahamas, and that's how this whole thing came to be. So let me just backtrack a little bit just to show you how interesting this is, right? At least to us. So a while ago, a lot of the academics would tell us that there was no way that we could be Taino because all the Tainos had died, and any Indian blood that was on the islands was actually from slaves that were brought to the Caribbean when the Spanish came. They brought slaves from Mexico, from North America, etc. And that's plausible, it makes sense, right? However, that's not an exact science, you know? So when they did the bones, they found out exactly where these migrations were from. And they realized that the people that were there were actually Taino. But the way they found it was with a tooth that was found in a cave in the Bahamas. Right, so they found 4 skulls in the Bahamas in a cave called Eleuthera, and the island's called Eleuthera actually. And one of those 4 skulls had a tooth with a complete sequence of DNA. So for us, that was that moment where it was like, oh my God, if we match that tooth, those are our ancestors. But if we don't match that tooth, then maybe these naysayers are correct, and maybe we're just, you know, Mexican descendants or something that were brought to the islands, you know, that came. And sure enough, they grabbed 200 samples from Puerto Rico, and they matched it to that tooth, right? And all 200 matched the tooth. And that was tremendous. And that's what actually, after that, that's when they stopped talking about Taino extinction and began talking about Taino assimilation. So now it's like, yes, the Tainos are assimilated, but not exterminated. But that's what we were always saying all along. You know, we were always saying we know about the African ancestry, we know about the Spanish ancestry, but the Taino is always cast to the side. You know, I can talk about being Afro-Dominican or Afro-Cuban, but if I say Indio-Cubano or Indio-Puerto Riqueño, now it's a problem. You know, and that's the way it was. There was always this stigma attached to an indigena. And another thing too is that a lot of the material culture was obviously Caribbean indigenous. And they used to always attribute that to the Africans copied it before the Indians died and continued it. But now you know that there is this continuation, you know. As a matter of fact, in a lot of the Spanish settlements that they've excavated, you know, you see the transition from Taino style pottery made with Taino techniques to Spanish style pottery made with Taino techniques. So that meant that the Spanish men were marrying Taino women, and the Taino women were continuing their traditions and passing on their words, their genes, and everything. And that's who we are today, you know? So for us, what we say is that when you look at the ancient bones in the Caribbean, the oldest bones, and you look at, let's say, the bones that came with the Africans,